Hey everyone, Nicholas here and welcome back to my channel. Alright, as the title suggested, in this video I'm going to talk about my first impression when I first arrived at Singapore, which is like, I guess it's like 3 years ago. Yeah, this is already my 4th year at NUS right now, so yeah, it's already been 3 years. So the first time I came here is like 2018. So yeah, it's already been 3 years. I'm here 3 years plus, actually 3.5 years. So yeah, let's talk about it. Alright, so for the context, I'm actually from Medan, Indonesia, which is actually quite close to Malaysia and quite close to Singapore as well. In fact, I would say, I think Medan is quite close to Penang, Malaysia, which is just, I think, 30 minutes or 45 minutes of direct flight. It's very close, super close. And to Singapore, I guess it's also only about like 1 hour, around 1 hour of flight, direct flight from Medan to Indonesia. Of course, right now due to COVID, I don't think they have any direct flight, but when there was direct flight, it was just, I think, around 1 hour-ish, if I'm not mistaken. So actually Medan and Singapore is actually quite close, and the culture, because of that, is also quite similar in a sense. So yeah, I might not have that much of culture shock. So maybe compared to people who, let's say, come from the US or Europe, then you might actually have a much more significant difference compared to me when you first arrive at Singapore. So yeah, that's just the context that I wanted to give first at the beginning of the video. So what I'm going to share might slightly or might be biased due to where I came from. Alright, so without further ado, let's talk about it. Right, so first, I think my first impression when I first arrived here would be things are very expensive. So for this point, I think it might not be relatable to everyone. Reason being is that, let's say you're coming from developed country, then in Singapore, I guess the prices are still quite comparable. So in a sense, this might not really be applicable to those coming from developed countries, say the US or Europe that I mentioned just now. But for me, coming from Indonesia, Medan, things are extremely expensive here. So I still remember the day when I bought my first lunch. So basically, it was the first, I think it was not exactly the first day I arrived at Singapore, because before that I already arrived, you know, do some setup, packing, unpack my stuff, but I was still with my parents, so I don't really pay for my own food yet. I don't really do that. So I guess the first time it really hits me was when it was the first day my parents just left, going back to my hometown, and it was me alone. I'm going to get lunch at school. I was staying at dorm, so I'm going to school canteen to just grab a lunch. And I was just grabbing a very simple chicken rice, and it cost me like $3.5, which, by the way, it's not that expensive here in Singapore. But that $3.5, if let's say going back to Indonesia, Medan especially, I could already get like nasi padang with all the side dishes. And yeah, perhaps I'll just put the picture, and you can see the comparison there. And even in Medan, Indonesia, sometimes you can even get that nasi padang with all those side dishes for even less than $3.5. I guess you maybe around 20 something thousand rupiah, which is around like $2 each in Singapore dollar. I could already get that nasi padang. So that's a very significant difference right there, and it really hits me when I first bought my lunch. So like, things are very expensive here, like just insane. And yeah, that's just for canteen, because I do realize that, okay, this is just canteen food, it costs that much. Obviously, when you eat out at, let's say, a cafe, or let's say you go to restaurant, then the prices will be significantly higher than 3.5, obviously. So maybe just to give a bit of context, I guess the food, let's say you are staying at school, and let's say you're going to school canteen, typically, let's say at NUS or even at NTU, the price would be around like $3 to $5, I guess, on average, for a meal. You can get for $3 to $5. And let's say you are going to like a cafe, but it's not like a very huge restaurant, maybe not on the city center, then maybe for a meal you can get it at around like $8 to $10, I guess. It's still doable. But let's say you're going to a cafe in a central shopping center, or a more higher class, or maybe a more atas kind of cafe or restaurant, then it will cost you like around 10 to 15, I guess $10 to $50. Let's say you're going to perhaps one of the more popular restaurants here is, let's say, Song Fa Bak Kut Teh, then it's like $10 to $15 for a meal. I guess it's quite reasonable there. So yeah, that's just the price ranges. Of course, you can go higher than that. Obviously there are a lot of foods that cost higher than that, but yeah, generally those are what you can expect to spend here for a meal at Singapore. And yeah, again, like I mentioned just now, these might not really be applicable for those coming from developed countries, because actually Singapore, if I'm not mistaken, is actually still considered even quite cheap in a sense. Let's say if I'm not mistaken, compared to let's say Australia, I guess the food here is still cheaper because you have hawker centers. So yeah, and the food at hawker center actually costs, yeah, I forgot to mention this, the food at hawker center actually costs around like $3 to $5 as well for a meal. So it's quite similar to the prices that you pay at school canteens, which is let's say at NUS or NTU. So the prices are there. So those are the average prices that you expect to spend for a meal. So yeah, that is really the first thing that struck me when I first arrived here. Typically, definitely my first day at Singapore alone. Yeah, I just find everything extremely expensive. And yeah, a little bit about hawker center. Perhaps you don't know hawker center. Hawker center is basically like a food court, but it's more like traditional kind of food court, not something you find in plaza or shopping center. So maybe I'll just drop a picture here as well. Ta-da! So yeah, that's the hawker center. So typically the food there is relatively cheaper, I would say, and actually it tastes good most of the time as well. So it doesn't mean that, you know, it's cheaper then it doesn't taste good. It still tastes good, and it's also quite clean. A lot of hawker center are actually very clean as well. So yeah. Alright, so next, among my first impressions here is actually things or everywhere is very clean and pedestrian friendly in a sense. So again, perhaps this might be biased because I'm coming from Indonesia, but I do find almost every places in Singapore very clean. Of course, I do have my fair share of complaint on some of the places that it's not as clean, including some places in NUS, but that's not the point of this video. Perhaps we'll talk about it in some other videos. But I would say generally almost all of the places you go, things are very clean, including the road. I don't think you can find any trash when you're walking around. It's very a rare sight, I would say. So things are very clean here. So generally almost anywhere you go, it would be very, very clean, so you don't really have to worry about that. And yeah, that's one thing that I find amazing here. Perhaps, you know, I'm coming from Indonesia and obviously the road are not as clean. Maybe I'll just draw a picture as well. So that's Indonesia, or specifically Medan. So as you can see, the road aren't very clean, and they aren't really pedestrian friendly in a sense. So yeah, so this is another thing that I find really great in Singapore, and it really struck me. It's really amazing that you can almost walk anywhere, like anywhere. And yeah, when you're supposed to cross the road, when there's a zebra cross or there's a crossing, the vehicle or any cars or motorcycle, anything, they will just stop it for you. They will really stop for you until you pass, and then only then they will just start moving, you know. Even when, let's say, you stop at the side of the road, they won't go first. They will let you walk and they will let you cross the road first. Only then they will move the car, they will move their vehicle, they will start moving. So that's the thing that I find quite interesting, because back in my hometown, that's definitely not the case. Typically, when we are supposed to cross the road, we have to be very careful. We have to watch out a lot. So yeah, that's really amazing. And another thing that I find really interesting here is that the government is actually keep on building covered paths, meaning that maybe I'll just draw a picture as well here. Ding, ding. So I think they're still constructing a lot of covered path. In fact, I guess they wanted everywhere to have covered path in a sense. So this is definitely very convenient for us pedestrian when we are walking around, you know, especially when it's raining. So I would say typically right now, for almost every MRT stations, you will definitely have some sort of covered path to, let's say, one of the bus stop. That's almost for sure. And yeah, if you're on the city center, then definitely it's sort of like you don't even need to worry about not bringing an umbrella, because most of the cases, I would say, you will have some sort of covered path for you to walk through, be it the covered path that I showed you just now, or perhaps, you know, some underground path, or maybe some shopping centers, so they are connected. So you really have a lot of covered path for you to walk around here in Singapore, especially in the city center. So yes, that's very convenient, I would say. Of course, it's still safer if you do bring your umbrella, or, you know, in case it rains, but typically most cases you won't really need it, because you have some sort of covered path if you don't mind, you know, walking a little bit further than you're supposed to, something like that. So yeah, those are also something that I find very amazing, which is like, you know, things are very clean here and you can walk almost everywhere. Alright, last but not least, it's very safe here. So I guess some of you, or maybe most of you, will have known that Singapore is actually one of the safest countries in the world.